IOP Metzner, and today for my IOP, I will be presenting on how setting assists in the portrayal of theme in Woman at Point Zero by Noel El-Sadawi. Next slide, please. So before we can look at the setting, we first have to establish the theme. Does anyone remember what the theme of the story was? Justin?
Oh, I didn't raise my hand.
Oh,
but
I thought you raised your hand, sorry. Does anyone? No? Okay. Well, the theme was that women are inferior to men in Egyptian society. Next slide, please. So, yes, that's the theme. And hopefully my dress kind of helped you guys understand that a little bit more. I'm wearing what they wore in Egypt in the 1970s. This is called niqab. It's a more modern version, but women were expected to be completely modest, be covered with only the eyes showing, or just even sometimes to cover their eyes. Next slide, please. So this is the photo. It was on my first slide. It's a woman wearing the same thing that I am, but you can see that she has a bruise on one of her eyes. And the picture is supposed to represent how even though women are being told to cover up, nothing can cover up the true abuse that they suffer from men in the countries. Next slide, please. So how I'm going to do this is I'm going to show you guys some clips or some quotes from the story, and then I'll go in to explain them, how they relate to the theme. So the first slide says that every single man I did get to know filled me with but one desire, to lift my hand and bring it smashing down on his face. But because I am a woman, I have never had the courage to do so. So this is what Firdaus told the person who was interviewing her when she was in jail. This was before she even got into her experiences. And if you pay attention to the second sentence, it says that she never had the courage to do so because she's a woman. That is because in her society, women are ranked under men, and they're supposed to be submissive and completely obedient, and it's just completely unacceptable for them to act out. Next slide, please. They cut off a piece of flesh from between my thighs, and I no longer felt the strong sensation of pleasure that radiated from an unknown and yet familiar part of my body. So does anyone know what this procedure is that she's talking about? Alex?
Is that sterilizing?
Yeah, it's technically, it's called a clitorectomy, where basically what happened was she asked a question. Firdaus asked her mother a question on her parents' relationship, and she just basically told her mother that she didn't feel that her father was really her father and that he wasn't really caring for her. And it's, as a woman, she's not allowed to question what a man does, how a man acts. So her punishment was they took a small knife or a razor and they cut off her clitoris. Next slide, please. I would say, I will go to El-Azhar and study like you. Then he would laugh and explain that El-Azhar was only for men. So when Firdaus was younger, she had a really strong relationship with her uncle. She loved him and admired him, and he would teach her what he was learning while he was in school. And so he went to school in El-Azhar, and she would always want to go with him, and he told her that he couldn't because it's only for men. Education for women was discouraged because they're not supposed to be going out and working, and they're supposed to stay home and cook and raise the family, and that is because they're inferior to men. Next slide, please. So when one of his female children died, my father would eat his supper, my mother would wash his legs, and he would go to sleep just as he did every night. When the child that died was a boy, he would beat my mother, then have his supper and lie down to sleep. So when Firdaus was younger, she had several brothers and sisters, although they aren't really mentioned too much in the story. And basically what this is saying, what she's trying to say, is that her father could care less if one of his daughters died. It was just, he had a daughter, she died, life moves on. But if it was a boy, he was devastated. He felt that it was a waste of a life, and the boys had so much more potential than any of his daughters would ever have. Next slide, please. A virtuous woman was not supposed to complain about her husband. Her duty was perfect obedience. So we'll kind of jump forward to after Firdaus got married. She was forced to marry a much older man, and he had somewhat of a deformity on his chin, where some days it would be dry and crusty and other days it would ooze a really nasty smelling pus. And while they were at first, she would just turn her head away when he tried to kiss her, but he started to beat her and she realized that she's expected to be completely obedient and she had to kiss him whenever he felt like it, even though she really didn't want to. She didn't love him, but she knew that once she was put in her place, she knew that she had to do whatever he wanted. Any questions so far? No? Okay. Next slide. Okay, so now that we've established the theme and looked at examples from the story, we can take a look at the setting. So does anyone know what the setting of the story is? Like the time and place?
It's like in an Egyptian society.
Mm-hmm.
The time, I don't know, but it was a while ago.
Okay, yeah, so next slide, please. The setting was in Cairo, which is the capital of Egypt, in the 1970s. So you can look at the map, and here's Egypt, here's the capital, Cairo. So Egypt is considered a Mediterranean country because it borders the Mediterranean Sea. And it is Northern African, but most people do consider it as a part of the Middle East just because the culture is so similar to that of Iraq and Jordan and Syria and things such as that. So, next slide, please. So basically we have to look at the culture of Egypt to kind of understand how it affects the theme. So it's a very conservative culture. At the time, women were not allowed to leave the house without their husband's permission or go anywhere, leave the country. Everything they had to do, they had to run by their husbands. They were expected to dress like this very conservatively. Basically nothing that they did they weren't supposed to do anything that could be considered promiscuous in the slightest way. Next slide, please. So now we'll look at some parts of the book that relate to the setting. So he told me that kissing was a sin and dancing too. So this is from the part of the book where Firdaus, when she finished school, her uncle took her to the movies, and in the movies there's a scene of a woman and a man kissing and dancing, and her uncle told her that it was completely unacceptable. And here we see couples, you can go to the park and you see them kissing. It's really not considered a big deal here. But at that time in Egypt, it was considered a huge deal. It's something very private that they're supposed to keep in between themselves. And even dancing, that was considered to be promiscuous and very inappropriate if a woman was seen dancing. Does anyone have any questions? Betsy.
And you said that the setting was in the 1970s, correct? So is there any correlation between then and now? Would you say that it's less, that it's less harsh, or would you say it's about the same or even worse now?
Well, it's definitely not worse. Now it is better in some respects. Women are still expected to be conservative, however they don't have to veil. Egypt is actually, of the Middle Eastern countries, one of the most lenient with that. Plenty of women choose not to wear the veil, or they'll wear it like this, and they'll just wrap their hair just to keep their hair in place. But it's definitely a lot better now. But you would still today, you wouldn't see people kissing in the streets or dancing or going on dates. Or actually dancing, yeah, but you wouldn't see them kissing or anything like that. Any other questions? Next slide, please. So she is a woman. How could I be in love with a woman? This was while Firdaus was in school. She had a best friend named Wafia, and she had this one professor named Miss Iqbal, who she felt was she was like a motherly figure to her. She reminded her a lot of her own mother, and when she tried to describe Miss Iqbal to Wafia, she couldn't really put her feelings into words. So her friend teased her and was asking if she was in love with her. But she immediately said, no, it's impossible. She's a woman. Because the culture is so conservative, no one is really openly gay. It's very strict, and it's not even there's one person in love with someone. Most of the time it's arranged and what's best for the family. Any questions on that? Okay. Send my niece to the university where she will mix in the company of men. So while Firdaus was at home, her uncle was married to another woman, and the woman didn't like Firdaus at all, thought she was eating too much food, wasn't cleaning or contributing to the house, and wanted to send her away. So she brought the topic up to her uncle, and her uncle was completely against sending her to mix in the company of men, but it's not because he feared that something bad would happen to her. It's simply because it would make himself look bad, because women are not supposed to be seen associating with men openly in public, learning alongside them, just because their job is to stay at home, cook, clean, raise the kids. They're inferior to men. Any questions on that? Next slide, please. She replied that it was precisely men well versed in their religion who beat their wives. The precepts of religion permitted such punishment. So this is a conversation that took place between Firdausa's uncle and his wife regarding having Firdaus get married. At the time, she was around our age, 16, maybe even 15. And Firdaus's uncle's wife was trying to explain that she didn't really want Firdaus to marry a man so involved in the religion, because in Islam it is acceptable to beat women if they're out of line, and the men in the society would kind of use that to their advantage just to be abusive and put women in their place, and it's a very degrading society for women. Any questions on that? No. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we can look at how Sadawi used the setting to portray the theme. Using Egypt to represent the fact that women in society are inferior to men was probably one of the best things she could do, because there's government policies and laws that restrict the rights of women. Socially, they don't have, even if it's legally okay for them to go out and do certain things, socially it's completely unacceptable. And I personally don't think there's another part in the world that could portray this theme as well as Egypt did, especially during the 1970s when it's a very oppressive society. Yes?
How do you connect with the novel? Like, what is your personal...
Okay, so my heritage, I am Syrian Indian, so the culture that I've grown up with is similar to Egyptian culture, and I mean, I'm not abused like Firdaus was, but just the cultural norms and standards that I'm held to as a woman still, it's similar along the same lines as the cultural standards women have to uphold in Egypt, and so that's the connection that I have with the novel. Any other questions? How did you guys feel the setting affected the theme? I need someone to answer.
Well, the way that like society was at that time definitely like had an effect on like the theme, because the theme was like explaining the oppression of women at that time period in that in those types of societies. So yeah, I think it coincided well.
Does anyone else have any other thoughts? Yeah.
I think the setting not only like contributed to the theme as in the way you like proposed it because of cultural system, but also the way that the setting and the theme help to create like this mood where it's educational for someone who doesn't experience this every day.
Anyone else? Does anyone have any final questions? Okay, next slide, please. Thank you all for watching. I hope you learned a lot.